What happened just a few months ago shattered all my certainty, revealing that what I believed to be a normal life was, in reality, something completely different. I never imagined that my marriage, that refuge I built with so much care, would end up becoming a labyrinth of shadows and desires that were not my own. My name is Elena. I always considered my relationship with Carlos to be what you might call a solid marriage. We had been together for 10 years, a decade of shared silences, dinners in front of the TV, and a routine that, while predictable, gave me a sense of security. Carlos had always treated me with an almost obsessive devotion. He watched my every gesture as if he wanted to engrave them into his memory. I knew he loved me, that was never in doubt, but there was something in his gaze, an enigmatic intensity that sometimes made me feel like he expected something from me that I couldn't quite understand. He worked long hours at his corporate job, was often away on business, and I stayed home. We had built a life full of everyday moments, but beneath the surface, something was missing. The distance between us seemed to grow over time, an invisible current separating us despite sleeping in the same bed. Everything changed on a warm Friday night. I had come home exhausted after a long day, looking forward to relaxing with a glass of wine. Carlos was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of whiskey in his hand. There was a strange tension in the room, something I couldn't quite decipher. "Elena," he said with surprising calmness, almost devoid of emotion, "I have a proposal for you." I sat across from him, intrigued. Carlos had never been one to talk much. He preferred to act rather than get lost in discussions. But that night he seemed different, almost detached, as if he were talking about someone else. "What kind of proposal?" I asked, trying to hide the nervousness that was starting to creep up my spine. He looked me straight in the eyes. His expression was unreadable. "I want you to be with another man," he let out. My heart stopped for a moment. It felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I sat there in disbelief, repeating his words in my mind. "Cheat on you? Are you joking, Carlos?" "He's not joking," he replied, with that same icy calm. "I want you to do it, and I want to watch." His words hit me like a bucket of cold water. I couldn't process what he was suggesting. My mind was spinning. Why would someone who claims to love you ask for something like that? "Why?" My voice trembled. "Don't you love me enough?" "It's not a question of love," he replied with an enigmatic smile I had never seen on him before. "It's a matter of trust. I want to see how far you're willing to go for me." Trust. That was his concept of trust. I stood up, furious and incredulous. I told him that this wasn't normal, that our life wasn't a game for twisted fantasies. Carlos simply set his glass down on the table and admitted that our love had never been normal. Those words lingered in my head for days. I felt confused, angry, but also, and this is what I'm most ashamed to admit, intrigued. What was he really looking for? Was it a whim, or was there something deeper behind his proposal? I couldn't get that episode out of my mind, no matter how hard I tried to ignore the discomfort that consumed me. Weeks passed. Carlos didn't bring up the subject again, but the conversation remained present, hanging between us like an invisible ghost. I admit it, there was a part of me that wanted to explore how far my husband's madness went. That's when Carlos mentioned Roberto. Roberto had been his best friend since college, a charismatic, charming man, the kind who always captures everyone's attention without even trying. Although I had never admitted it, not even to myself, I had always felt a bit intimidated by his confidence. Roberto was a frequent guest at our gatherings, always polite, always a gentleman. One night, while we were having dinner, Carlos broke the silence again. "Why don't we invite Roberto over next Saturday?" he said with a calm smile. "Maybe we could do something special, something different." I accepted the proposal without thinking too much about it. Maybe I wanted to test Carlos's intentions, or perhaps I was just curious to see where all of this would lead us. The weekend arrived, accompanied by an atmosphere heavy with tension. I chose a fitted, provocative black dress, wanting to feel attractive and desired, though I didn't know for whom. My fingers ran down the silky fabric. My curves felt accentuated, defying the garment. Carlos didn't comment on my clothes, but his eyes followed me with an intensity that burned my skin. Roberto arrived right on time, bringing wine and his vibrant energy. The night began casually, with laughter and light banter about work and travel, but the tension grew as the night wore on. I felt Carlos's eyes on me at every moment, and to calm my nerves, I drank more than usual. Then the unexpected happened. Carlos stood up and, in a calm but firm voice, said, "Elena, why don't you show Roberto how much we appreciate him?" The room fell into an abrupt silence. Roberto looked at me bewildered. My heart was pounding with a force that scared me, and a rush of adrenaline surged through my entire body. I was paralyzed, caught between fear and uncertainty. Carlos walked over, took my hand, and whispered in my ear, "It's time, love. Trust me." Something in his tone of voice, perhaps the alcohol or my own curiosity, repressed through years of routine, pushed me forward. I stepped closer to Roberto. I could feel his heavy breathing. In his eyes, I saw a mix of surprise and compliance. And then the unthinkable happened. Our lips met in a kiss full of desire and confusion. Roberto hesitated at first, but then he let himself go. Carlos, for his part, remained motionless, watching with an unreadable expression. When the kiss ended, the silence in the living room was deafening. I turned to Carlos, expecting anger or regret, but all I saw was a slight smile on his lips. "See, Elena?" he said in a tone I couldn't quite define. It wasn't that terrible, was it? Terrible wasn't the right word. I felt confused, betrayed by my own husband who was handing me to another man, but also strangely alive, as if I had crossed a boundary I didn't know existed. Roberto left shortly after, leaving a thick atmosphere in his wake. Carlos and I were left alone. He didn't say another word. He just kissed my forehead before going to bed, as if everything that had just happened were perfectly normal. But I knew nothing would ever be normal again. In the days that followed, the emptiness inside me grew. I thought constantly about Roberto, about that forbidden kiss, about my husband's gaze while it was happening. I felt like a stranger to myself, disconnected from the woman I used to be. I received a text from Roberto a few days later. It was brief. "How are you?" I knew there was much more behind those words. I replied nervously, and soon the messages became frequent. At first, they were trivial, but always with a subtext that took me right back to that night. My husband seemed indifferent, or perhaps he was just satisfied, almost proud, as if he had achieved a silent victory. One night, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was a message from Roberto. "I need to see you." A wave of guilt hit me, but I also felt an unstoppable curiosity. Careful not to wake Carlos, I walked over to the window, looking for answers in the dimness of the street. I typed, tomorrow. The next day, a sense of guilt followed me every move. Carlos seemed to not notice anything, or maybe he was playing his own game. His impenetrable gaze disarmed me. I told him I was meeting a friend for coffee, and he just nodded with a shadow of doubt that he didn't put into words. I arrived at the cafe, a discreet place with soft lighting. Roberto was already there. When he saw me, his smile revealed more nervousness than confidence. "I don't know why I'm here," I told him, trying to sound sure of myself. "Of course you know," he replied, his eyes flashing with an intensity that left me frozen. "But Carlos," I tried to reason. "Carlos already knows everything, Elena," Roberto interrupted firmly. "He was the one who wanted this." My world reeled. What was he saying? "Carlos talked to me long before that night," Roberto confessed. "He asked if I would be willing. He told me it was what you needed to wake up. He planned everything from the beginning." My world crumbled. Carlos had been pulling the strings like a master puppeteer, while I played my part without even realizing it. Why? Why would my own husband use me that way? "Because he wants you to discover something about yourself," Roberto said, gently taking my hand. "Something you're maybe afraid to accept." His touch was warm, and for a moment I felt safe, but the reality of the manipulation hit me like a punch. I pulled away sharply. I couldn't believe my marriage had turned into this game of mirrors and lies. I returned home with a heavy heart. Carlos was waiting for me with his serene, almost placid smile. "What did you do?" I asked him quietly.